Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're glad that you're here. It's good to see so many people who are committed to hearing more and learning about what the options are. I would like for us to pray real quickly. Holy God, we thank you for a beautiful day. We thank you for your grace and for your love, and we ask for your forgiveness. Not one of us claims to be perfect, but we are all flawed human beings in need of your grace. Pray that your Holy Spirit guide us during this time. Pray that you guide Reverend Therrell and his words, and that he, amazing man, we're so glad that he's here and very thankful that he's here, and what an amazing mind as well. So guide him and our time together, and we ask this in Christ's name. Amen. I know you didn't come to hear me speak. I'm Webb. Hey, Mike. I'm Webb Belanja. I'm the senior pastor here. I'm not the most senior pastor, but I'm the senior pastor here. We are very glad that you're here. We welcome you. There are restrooms behind the curtain, and back. You go past the curtain and out the door, and then no. In the little entryway there are two restrooms. If they happen to be occupied, you can actually go all the way through into the gym, and there are restrooms on the left. How this came about very quickly, our church, Malden Church, has gone through the process of voting, as many of you have, and we're thankful to our bishop for having provided a means by which we could go through and vote and leave the denomination. We were trying to decide if and when we get out of the United Methodist Church in June, what will we do? And we have actually gotten to where we are between independent or the Global Methodist Church. People started asking questions, well, what would that entail one way or the other? What does the Global Methodist Church discipline say? And of course, I sent them to the website, but they just want to ask questions. And so I said, well, how about if we were able to get the person who wrote the discipline to come and speak? And they were like, well, I guess that would be okay, you know. So, Jay, we're glad that you're here. Turns out that Mike Moretti, one of our church members here, and a friend of mine, these two worked together in Florida for quite some time. They have a great deal of respect for each other. And I have gained a great deal of respect for both of them as well. But because of that, I'm going to let Mike introduce Jay. So, Mike.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? There was a lot more people here than I thought was going to be here. But let me just take a couple seconds to say thank you all for coming, because this is a very important issue that we're going through right now. I met Jay in 2008 when he became the senior pastor of Cape Coral First United Methodist Church in Cape Coral, Florida. He has a leadership skill that is rooted deep in the Word. And I can't emphasize that enough. I'll tell you just a little bit about his educational background now. Jay has a history in the upstate. He got his undergraduate degree at Presbyterian College. Blue Hose. And then he went on to get his law degree from the greatest university in the country, the University of Florida. And then he got his Master of Divinity at Asbury Theological Seminary. That's just a little bit of his educational background, but he's been learning forever. Jay, as a senior pastor at Cape Coral First United Methodist Church, I'm just going to tell you this one quick story. He came to us in 2008, and we had half of a gymnasium, and we're in the middle of the worst economic downturn that we've had since the 80s. and he had the vision that we should turn that gymnasium into a disciple factory. And we turned that into a 144 student preschool, and it's been very successful. After Jay left Cape Coral First United Methodist Church, he went on to become the district superintendent in the Northeast District in Jacksonville, Florida. And he held that position until he became the president of the Wesley Covenant Association, Florida. His current position now is he's the president of the Wesley Covenant Association. And as Webb alluded to earlier, he is one of the three men that wrote the Book of Discipline for the Global Methodist Church. I could probably go on and on about all of the things that he's done and all of the things that he could do. But the one thing that I really want to do is I want to say that my most proudest thing that I'll do right now is introduce you to my friend, Reverend J. Therrell.
Well, good evening, friends. It is so good to see you all. Let me grab the remote. Thank you, Webb. Thank you for spending part of your evening with me tonight. I appreciate that. You're allowing a gator to come up here into the upstate. Mike and Jan Moretti are dear friends of ours. What Mike did not tell you, I'm going to add a little bit to the story. While we were at Cape Coral First together, our Director of Operations and Finance position became open, and I'm never one to shy away to ask bold questions, so I went to him and said, would you quit your job and come be our Director of Operations and Finance? And he said yes, he would do it. So we even served together on staff for a while, which was really cool. So it's good to be with them tonight and you. The upstate is kind of a second home for me. So my mom and dad are both from the Greenville-Spartanburg area. My mom graduated from Parker High School and my dad graduated from Spartanburg High School. And I'm a third generation Blue Hose. So my father and my grandfather both went to PC. So South Carolina has been my stomping ground since I was born. This is where we came to be with family every year, multiple times a year. So it feels like a second home to me when I get to be here. My mom's the oldest of five, and she's the only one of the five that does not live in Greenville-Spartanburg. So all my aunts and uncles are here, tons of cousins, including in Malden as well. So it's just good to be with y'all. Just a couple housekeeping sorts of things. My email address is up there, so you are welcome to ask me any question you want to tonight. Nothing will bother me, I promise. But if you get up tomorrow and you say, oh, I wish I would have asked X, just email me. I'll be more than happy to try to answer your question. Do the best that I can. Yeah, and Pastor Webb was saying questions will be at the end. But again, you can ask me anything you want to. Feel free to take pictures of slides. If that's something that helps you, please do that. If you want a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, email me. I'll be happy to email it to you afterwards, if that would help as well. I always say this when I share this particular presentation. Friends, I am a traditionalist or theological conservative or whatever you want to call it, and I'm proud of that, and I don't apologize for it. You may not be. That's okay. I love you anyway. We can disagree without being disagreeable. It really is possible. I know our culture kind of seems that we've forgotten how to do that, but it really is possible. I'm the father of a teenager. I assure you it happens every day. We really can disagree without being disagreeable. So I will not shy away and proudly share all that I have to share tonight. If you don't agree with it, it's okay. We can still get along just fine. No worries about that whatsoever. Let me share just one other thing that the leaders of the Global Methodist Church in South Carolina would like for you to know. If you are a church or a pastor that is thinking you will want to align with the Global Methodist Church, they want to connect with you. So their website is GMC of SC. You can remember that. That's pretty easy to remember. GMCofSC.org. So you can go there. You can sign up to get on their email list so that you can get their e-blasts. That will help them to just make sure you're getting all the news that you need to know about the Global Methodist Church as it continues to launch and grow in the state of South Carolina, and I encourage you to do just that. You've got good folks that are doing that. So let's get started. I'm going to start with Scripture. I just think that's always where we ought to start. So I'm going to turn to the book of Jude. I don't know how much you know about the book of Jude. Tiny little book right before the end of the Bible, right before the book of Revelation. If you want to feel super accomplished that you read a whole book of the Bible, go home and read the book of Jude tonight. It will take you about 90 seconds, and you will have gotten an entire book read this week. Jude, if you don't know, he was the younger half-brother of Jesus. So he would have been the full son of Mary and Joseph. And he was one of the early leaders of the church in Jerusalem. Not exactly sure when Jude was written, but most kind of theologically conservative biblical scholars think it's actually one of the earliest books, not the earliest, but one of the earliest books in the New Testament. Probably written 20, at the most 30 years after Jesus' resurrection. So really, really close to the beginning of the church and its movement. And here's the interesting thing about Jude. This was written 2,000 years ago. As it says in another book of the Bible, there is nothing new under the sun. The very same things that we are worried about today in 2023, Jude was worried about 2,000 years ago. And that's why I turned to Jude. Jude says this, "Dear friends, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt compelled to write," listen to what he says next, "and urge you to contend for the faith." Contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to God's holy people. For certain individuals whose condemnation was written about long ago have secretly slipped in among you. They are ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God into a license for immorality and deny Jesus Christ, our only sovereign and Lord. I want to dispel a rumor that you may have heard about this whole sort of disaffiliation situation. I think the media loves to make it all about one topic in particular, human sexuality. It's salacious, it gets clicks, it gets ratings on television. It's kind of one of the issues of the day that we just read about a lot in pop culture. I think that is only a presenting symptom of a much deeper issue. For me, this, more than anything else, is about two things. And I think they're the same two things that Jude is worried about. It's the authority of Scripture and the lordship of Jesus Christ. That's what Jude is already, 20 to 30 years after the church has started, they're already worried about that. We're still worried about it 2,000 years later. There is nothing new under the sun. Well, about 1,700 years after Jude writes this, another man comes along. We Methodists tend to like him. His name was John Wesley, and he was an Anglican priest who decided that the Church of England was just not really doing what the Church of Jesus Christ ought to do, and began to try to reform it from within. And he started this Methodist movement that we're all a part of. Wesley said it a little differently. Wesley said, "I am not afraid that the people called Methodists should ever cease to exist, either in Europe or America. But I am afraid lest they should only exist as a dead sect, having the form of religion without the power. And this undoubtedly will be the case unless they hold fast both the doctrine, spirit, and discipline with which they first set out." Wesley does not want us to be empty suits. He doesn't want us to say we're a church, but not boldly and proudly proclaim the lordship of Jesus Christ and the authority of Scripture, and that the gospel that has is amazingly good news for every single one of us that call Jesus Lord. It saves us. He wants to make sure we get that news to a world that's dying to hear it, literally. And so he was worried about it 1,700 years ago. Nothing's new under the sun. 300 years later, we're still worried about it in 2023. So if you want to ask questions about history, about how we all got here, I'm happy to do that when we get to that part. If you want a really good book that will kind of walk you through the whole history of how we got to where we are in American Methodism, ask me. I'll be happy to get it to you. I don't want to spend all that time, this time just on that. But I do want to say that it's these concerns that we Orthodox, kind of theologically conservative Methodists have had, that finally in this whole process, we decided that, you know what, we need to launch a new movement. And by the way, that's happened in Methodism repeatedly, over and over and over again. Actually, Wesley wasn't dead 20 years before it happened. The primitive Methodists in England got launched because they thought the Methodist Church in England had already had the form of religion without the power. We had the Methodist Episcopal Church, the Methodist Episcopal Church South, the Methodist Protestant Church, the Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church. We have a whole AME, the CME, the AME Zion, the Nazarenes, the Free Methodists. This is not unusual in Methodism. So I want to cast the vision of why it is that we think this new Global Methodist Church is necessary. So this is what it's all about. Friends, we want to be a church that is alive, and that holds very clearly that Jesus is Lord over every single thing, and that the Holy Spirit has to be the engine that drives every single ministry that we do. I'm going to take just one moment to say this is a good chance, if your church is disaffiliating and then joining the Global Methodist Church, take this opportunity to say, do we have any ministries at our church that the Holy Spirit is not the engine behind? Maybe it's time, even if it's a sacred cow, to let that go and ask, where is the Holy Spirit at work in our community, and how do we get behind what the Holy Spirit is doing where we live? I think that's biblical, and I think it's what Wesley would want us to do. Friends, we want to be a church that believes in scriptural authority, is very clear about our doctrine, crystal clear about our mission and aligned around it, and will hold people accountable to it, not because we're mean, but because we're missional. And when we don't hold people accountable to doctrine and scripture, we vary away from the mission. We lose it. We have the form of power without the religion. And we don't make disciples. And that's what we're called to do. We want to be, friends, a church that is dramatically streamlined and so much simpler and dramatically less expensive to run. You will not hear me say much about the United Methodist Church tonight on purpose. I will say this, so if you're not aware, the quadrennial budget for the United Methodist Church, they do their budget in terms of 4 years. For the general level of the church, for the current quadrennium, is $604 million. My mind doesn't really wrap around that. I'm used to hearing those kinds of figures associated with governments in large multinational corporations. That's a lot of money. Who funds that $604 million? You do, through your offerings that go through the apportionment system. We want a simpler church that does not have that gigantic footprint so that you don't have to pay for it, because we believe that if there's more money in your church treasury, you'll actually take that money and use it to make disciples. And how bad is it when the speaker's phone is the one that is going off? It's Jesus. No, sorry. It's not. Sorry. Friends, we want to be a denomination, a church that puts the local church back into the driver's seat. I have been a delegate at General and Jurisdictional Conference. I have been to more annual conferences than I could ever count. I have been a district superintendent. I have never seen a new disciple of Jesus made at any of those levels of the church. New disciples of Jesus are made in the local church through you, in your community, empowered by the Holy Spirit, inviting people to come and be a part of your faith community. We want to put the actual entity that makes disciples back in the front, in the driving seat once again. Friends, we want to be a church that embraces what I call the secret sauce of John Wesley, which is meeting people at their point of need, and the most important word that comes next in the sentence, and offers them Jesus. The first Methodists, when Wesley was leading the Methodist movement, they would feed people who were hungry, and they would build schools to educate the poor. There weren't public schools in England in the 1700s. They would build medicine dispensaries to give medicine to people who couldn't afford them. They met people's needs, but they always offered them Jesus. I think we're still really good today at meeting people's needs. I don't think we're always so good at offering them Jesus. And I would argue to you, if we're just meeting people's physical needs, A, we're not meeting their real needs because it doesn't have anything to do with eternity, and B, I would tell you we're the Red Cross. And we need the Red Cross. The Red Cross is a great organization. My state has hurricanes all the time. We benefit from the Red Cross. I've given to the Red Cross. But I think there's supposed to be something different about the church. And I know it's supposed to be Jesus. Friends, we want to be a church that is so clear about what we're for and aligned around it that we don't have to fight about what we're against. One of those rare times again where I'll mention the UMC. The UMC was founded in 1968. We've been fighting since 1968 about a whole host of theological issues and practical issues. I mean, we fought over hymnals. We've fought over what companies our retirement fund will invest in. Plus we fought over all sorts of doctrinal issues. Imagine if we could redeem all that time we've spent fighting and use it to make disciples. And imagine that we could be so crystal clear about what we're about that we don't have to argue anymore. And friends, lastly, we want to be a church, once again, that burns white hot passionate for evangelism. That was the driver of John Wesley. He wanted to save souls. In fact, his instructions to his preachers, you can read this. My favorite instruction for his preachers is, you have nothing to do but to save souls. That's it. A pastor for Wesley had that job, to save souls. We need to burn white hot for the souls of the people around us. I think that Paul says in Galatians that we're burdened for the souls of the people in our sphere of influence. It's up to us to share that saving good news that you and I know, and we want to be a church that just absolutely burns for that again, for all ages, all generations, all people. So that's the vision of kind of why we are doing what we're doing. So we birthed the Global Methodist Church on May 1st of last year. We are just shy of the first birthday, not quite 1 year old. We will be in just a couple weeks. We birthed it on May 1st. Some people get confused about what the relationship is between the Wesleyan Covenant Association and the Global Methodist Church. Totally understandable. The way I generally explain it, and I think is the best way to explain it, is that we were kind of the midwife that helped to birth the Global Methodist Church. We helped with a lot of the human resources, the legal resources, the financial resources, the volunteer resources to help get that baby birthed. It's out. It's getting on its feet. We are separate organizations. So we are not combined anymore. Our interests are closely aligned. So much so that I talk with GMC folks multiple times all week long. I have another hat that I wear. My evening job is to lead the Florida team that's beginning to put the GMC together in Florida, where I live. I was one of the 3 drafters of the discipline. So we're closely aligned, but we are separate organizations. The GMC will be the ongoing church. The WCA, at some point, its mission will be accomplished. Don't know quite when that is yet. We have some annual conferences. You will understand this. They didn't have a process to leave until recently. We've got one that has no process. North Georgia has none. And so we still have a job to do, but it is beginning to get closer to the end. I love the new mission statement of the Global Methodist Church, to make disciples of Jesus Christ that worship passionately, love extravagantly, and witness boldly. We wanted to put evangelism back into the mission statement. That's why we added the witness boldly part. We wanted to be crystal clear about what we want to align around. You see the logo there? Some people ask, so I'll just tell you if you want to know what the logo means. 3 circles that interlock with each other. I think you can figure it out. That's the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. They all intersect at the very center of the cross to remind us that what Jesus did for us on the cross is the central act of all creation. And then the edges on the circles on the outside are a little thicker than the ones on the inside. And the reason for that, it's supposed to remind us of a globe. And that Wesley famously told his Methodists over and over again, the world is my parish. The world is my parish. And we are called to be a global church that goes out everywhere. And friends, I am humbly proud to say that today, the Global Methodist Church has 1,750 churches, not even 1 year old yet, 2,300 clergy, already on 5 continents: North America, South America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. We still have the penguins in Antarctica that we have got to get to. And the Aussies, we've got to get down under to get them. But we are already, we may now be the second largest Wesleyan denomination. I'd need to see the totals. We're very close to being second. We're certainly third, if not. But we're larger now than the Presbyterian Church in America. In less than a year. So, I mean, it has been a very rapid growth, which is very exciting to see. So, the Global Methodist Church, friends, you do not have to worry about the doctrine. It is firmly in the very center of the 2,000-year Orthodox understanding of Christian doctrine and theology. And when I say that, I mean the big C church understanding. Roman Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox. We made sure of it. If you want to read it, I encourage you to do it. Go to globalmethodist.org. The entire book of Doctrines and Discipline is there, so you can read all of it there. You can, if you want to download it, you can download a PDF of it. I don't know if you want to print it. It's about 105 pages, but it's a lot of ink, but you could if you want to. There's a great FAQ section, lots of questions you have that are there, but if you want to read it, it's right there. So we've done a few things to try to make sure that our doctrine is strong. We have added back into our doctrine things like the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed. That is not official doctrine of the United Methodist Church. That was intentional, by the way. You can go back and read the history. When the church formed in 68, it was decided not to include that. We officially brought the Apostles' and Nicene Creed back into the doctrine. Something also, if you're a theology nerd, the definition of Chalcedon. That's important because it kind of is the early church statement on who we understand Jesus to be incarnationally. And so we want to be very clear about the lordship of Jesus Christ. And so we've added that. The Articles of Religion that John Wesley wrote are there. The Confession of Faith that the old EUB church wrote, but really are just a restatement of the Articles of Religion. They're very close. They're there. All of Wesley's standard sermons are official doctrine of the church. His explanatory notes on the New Testament are official doctrine. The general rules of the United Methodist Societies, the United Societies that Wesley wrote, all part of the official doctrine of the church. It's a way less complex book. And we did that on purpose. And here's what I'm talking about. So if you read the United Methodist Church Book of Discipline, minus the index, 808 pages. The Global Methodist Church Book of Doctrines and Discipline is 105 pages. That is an 88% reduction. I hope that demonstrates to you the level of commitment we have to just stripping away entire layers of bureaucracy, layers of the church, so that we have a smaller footprint that is lean and nimble, that costs a fraction of what the UMC does, so that you have more money, A, in your treasury to make disciples with, and B, have a whole lot less gatekeeping on top of you. We want the Global Methodist Church not to be about gatekeeping. We want it to be about permission giving. We want it to be a church where, I said this to some folks right before. I've had a couple pastors in Florida say, hey, we were thinking of starting this new ministry. What do you think? I'm like, does it violate our doctrine? No. Does it violate Scripture? No. Then don't ask me. Go do it. I mean, we don't need to do that anymore. We're permission giving. Go. Make disciples. Share the good news of Jesus Christ. We want to be permission giving. We know, friends, that accountability, even though the book has decreased, we know accountability needs to increase. So we've done that many ways. One of them is by term limiting bishops. One of the problems that I think many people would say is that we have had in the past bishops that are elected for life, and so they get this lifetime warranty on the office. Not in the Global Methodist Church. We are term limited. So that term limit needs to be set. I can tell you what the kind of conventional wisdom is. The conventional wisdom is maybe 2 6-year terms. We'll see. The first general conference will decide that. But after your term of office is over, you go back to the local church and you serve a local church again. Here's another reason why that's important. When you're a bishop, but eventually you're not going to be one anymore and you're going to be back in the local church, that means you have to live with the decisions that you've made. You're going to be impacted by them. We want that. That's a good thing. That's a really good thing, that you will one day have to live under the decisions that you helped to make. That's a good check on power. And so that's another reason why we've done that. If a bishop were, when they finished their term, if they were old enough, they could retire. But friends, retired bishops do not sit on the Council of Bishops. They have no vote. The only perk that a former bishop gets is they can call themselves Bishop Emeritus. Big deal. That is it. Accountability has been increased at all levels of the church. So the ordination process is so much simpler, but the accountability piece of it is so much greater. I actually personally am really glad I don't have to go through it again. At the deacon level, you now have to take an exam, a written exam on doctrine, history, polity, all those sorts of things. When you go for elders' orders, you have to take a second one, an advanced exam on doctrine and theology. I'm really glad I don't have to do that. I remember when I was at Asbury, I don't know if they still do this or not, but when I was at Asbury, after your first year, you had to take a Bible competency exam. I think at that time it was 40 questions, and it was just a verse. And you had to know book and chapter. They didn't ask you the verse, but they wanted to know book and chapter for 40 of them. And you had the whole Bible, and you had to know. I'm really glad, I don't have to do that. But we've added that in there. We've added accountability for churches. So we have a new provision. So if your church is teaching doctrine that is contrary to the orthodox understanding of doctrine in our Book of Doctrines and Discipline, after being appropriately warned, your local church can be disaffiliated. So that we can say, nope, you clearly don't want to be a part of us. You're not subscribing to the doctrine you promised that you would. That's fine. You're just not going to be a part of us. And here's the good news. There's no trust clause. So you're not taking their property. They'll leave with their property. But you can say, no, we're not going to allow this bad doctrine to be taught in your sermons, or we're not going to allow this bad action that's not biblical to occur anymore. Bishops will no longer hold bishops accountable. A completely independent commission made up of clergy and laity will hold bishops accountable. Not one bishop is allowed to sit on it, so that there are no more foxes guarding the hen house. So we've added that as well. Apportionments are dramatically less. We don't call them apportionments. We have a joke in Florida. I would have to put $1 in a jar because I just said apportionments. We call it connectional funding. I don't know that it matters, but connectional funding is much less. So we know what institutions like to do. Institutions tend to get bigger. They creep. They get a little bigger this year, and then a little bigger this year, and a little bigger this year, and before you know it, it's gotten really big, and who has to pay for it? You do. So we've capped it. So the general church can never request connectional funding higher than 1.5% of your operating income. Operating income's defined. If you want to go read it, it's in the 400s. It's basically what comes in through the offering plate. Currently set at 1%. Your annual conference can never request more than 5% of your operating income. I do not know of a provisional conference that has gone that high. The highest I've seen is 3%. Generally, not always, but generally in the United Methodist Church, apportionments tend to be somewhere around 10% of your income. Not always, but for most churches, that's true. So imagine the dramatic decrease that your church will owe in connectional funding and how much more money you'll have to make disciples at your church. And I've already mentioned this, friends, no trust clause. Never again. Your property will belong to your church. You will be the stewards over it to carry out with it whatever you have discerned that God is leading you to do. I mean, it's all His property. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, but it's yours to steward without a denomination ever again telling you what to do with it. And if you ever choose, if there's a day where you discern that it's time to leave the Global Methodist Church, 90 days, a simple majority vote, you're out. No trust clause. No one will take your property. There are no pension liabilities. There are no extra years of connectional funding to pay. No crazy fees, no 10% this or that. You're out. That's simple. We want to be a church of the called. We do not want to be a church of the trapped. We want to have churches in our denomination that burn white hot for making disciples of Jesus Christ, that worship passionately and love extravagantly and witness boldly. For our clergy, we've simplified that. I don't know how much you know about the old clergy system. There's just lots of layers of it. There's student local pastors and part-time local pastors and full-time local pastors and associate members and provisional elders and provisional deacons and full elders and full deacons. And no, we don't have any of that. We have deacons and elders. You become a deacon first, and then you become an elder after that. If you're going to serve a church, you'll need to be an elder. Deacons can serve churches temporarily on their way to becoming an elder. We can have permanent deacons as well. We continue our strong Methodist commitment to clergy of color and to female clergy. That has always been part of the Methodist movement, friends, from the very beginning. John Wesley sent out female preachers from the very start of the movement. He called them female local preachers. He did it, I would argue to you, because it's biblical. You may disagree with me on that. We can disagree without being disagreeable. Wesley would argue with you on that. I'm going to stand with Wesley, and I think it's very biblical. We've also had clergy of color from the very beginning. It's always been a part of the Methodist movement. So we have that strong historic commitment continued. No guaranteed appointment. What does that mean? You may have no clue what that means. Guaranteed appointment is one of these privileges that elders get that no one else gets. So an elder is guaranteed to serve a church. Here's the unintended consequence of that. I can tell you as a former district superintendent, every year the same 6 to 8 names came up on the cabinet table. Every year. So I want you to think about what that means. That means after 6 months, that church was already saying, this is not working out. We bring someone else in. The same names, 6 or 8 of them every year, but they were elders, and we were guaranteed a church, so we had to send them somewhere else. Who was the victim in that system? The local church. In the Global Methodist Church, if you are not effective, the bishop does not have to appoint you. There is a check on that. The bishop has to, in writing, provide the reasons why he or she is not appointing you. But if you are not effective, churches do not have to be victimized with that anymore. The appointment system is similar, but with some added guarantees of church and pastor being involved in the appointment process. So in the Global Methodist Church, first of all, pastors are not appointed year by year. Pastors are appointed indefinitely. So you no longer have to go through this every late spring, oh, will he come back? Will she come back? Or are they appointed somewhere else? That's just, it's not conducive to long-term health of a church. We want to create longer-term pastorates. It creates greater stability at the church, which creates a better foundation for growth. And so pastors are considered appointed indefinitely. Can they be moved? Sure, they can. The pastor can discern at some point that they feel God's calling them to move somewhere else. The church could discern that it's time for a new pastoral leadership at that church. So it's not that moves don't happen. They do happen, but it's not an automatic thing that happens every single year. And when there is a pastoral move, the bishop will appoint or project someone to you, and then it's happening in a couple different ways in different conferences, so we'll have to kind of see what the predominant way is. But here's the gist of it. The gist is the church and the pastor get a time to know each other. No more of this, don't call the pastor till Announcement Sunday. They don't exist. Or telling the pastor, that church doesn't exist till Announcement Sunday. Don't go there. Which, as soon as the pastor was told what church they're going to, did they wait for Announcement Sunday? Of course not. They got in the car right then and there and drove immediately to where and did the official sneak visit. And of course, all the laity pulled out their smartphones, Googled the name of the pastor, went to the website of the church they're currently serving, and started listening to sermons while stalking them on social media. So we're getting rid of all that. Getting rid of all that. You all the pastors, when I said the official sneak visit, went. And all the ladies are like, yeah, it happened. It did. And it's dumb. No more of that. Pastor and church, here you go. Y'all get to know each other. And you let us know if there's a missional reason why this is not a good fit. If there's a missional reason is not that you are a Florida State Seminole. It is very close. Very close. Oh, no, someone's doing the tomahawk chop. No. All right, I'm coming over here. Just... stretching a little bit. So if there's a missional reason, the bishop will send someone else. Now, I don't think the bishop's going to give you 10 bites at the apple. But if there's a legitimate missional reason, they'll send someone else. The church has so much more input. By the way, the pastor gets that input too. That's the way it should be. So they both get that input. And we guarantee that churches and clergy that come in together will stay together. So you don't have to worry about losing your pastor. You know you're going to get to keep your pastor. Local church structures. Remember I said we're putting y'all back in the driver's seat? We're not going to tell you how to govern yourselves. If you love having a church council and staff parish and finance and trustees and nominating committee, keep them. We don't care. If you like that, keep it. But if the default, friends, is one leadership team. So you decide. Because you know what it looks like to make disciples in your community. So you know how you need to structure yourselves so that you can actually effectively carry out the mission that you've been given. We're going to let adults be adults. Y'all figure that out. We trust you to do that. We have continued to use WestPath for our benefits. So clergy retirement it's not a problem. Seamlessly occurs. We're actually using WestPath for our health insurance as well. I believe in South Carolina you all use WestPath and HealthFlex already. So no difference. You'll just continue on HealthFlex. It's no different. So we did that intentionally to try to make the transition easier. That's true, by the way, if your church uses them for lay benefits. If you provide health insurance for your lay staff or retirement benefits, the same is true about that. If you have questions about that when we get to that part, ask them. Happy to answer those. And friends, we know that if we're going to be white hot for evangelism, we have to be white hot about planting new churches. So we have started a strong new church planting movement. Our goal is to have 3,500 new churches in the first 7 years of the Global Methodist Church. I can tell you where I'm from in Florida, we already have 4 that have launched. We're very excited about them. We have a couple more that are probably getting ready to start. New churches tend to make more new disciples than older churches do. It's just a reality. That's not a dig on older churches. It's just kind of the way it tends to work. So we want new churches because it will help to bring new people to faith in Jesus Christ. So friends, in kind of the summary of why I think and hope you will join the Global Methodist Church, for me, friends, it's about contending for the faith, making sure that we have an orthodox doctrine that is very firmly in the center of the 2,000-year understanding of orthodox theology. A fresh start where we don't have to fight anymore because we're aligned missionally. And we can use that time to make disciples a leaner and simpler church where the top-down stuff is over as much as possible and the local church is put back in the driver's seat because that's where disciples are made with an ordination process that is so much simpler but with a dramatically increased accountability. Accountability for everybody, not just the pastors, but for churches and certainly for bishops with less bureaucracy, with a whole lot less connectional funding, with local churches being able to own their property and no one ever telling them what to do with it again, you all getting to decide how you're going to govern yourselves to make sure your mission is effective in your community, and with you having so much more input than you have ever had on pastoral appointments before. But the bottom line for me, friends, is this: contend for the faith. We think this new denomination is poised to be so much more effective in sharing the saving good news of Jesus Christ that you and I know, and to help make the realities of heaven to become the realities of earth. That is what this is all about. A couple of, let me go here, websites if you want to go to. Remember I told you globalmethodist.org. That is a place that has a whole lot of answers to a lot of your questions. You remember the website for South Carolina GMC? What was it? Can you say it out loud? That was pretty easy. What was it? You got it. gmcofsc.org. Yes, very good. Wesleyan Covenant's website, our social media. You can go there as well. Lots of good things to find resources for. All right, Pastor Webb, you want to take over here?
We are going to take questions now. If you're watching online via stream, I think we're going to put on your screen a phone number that you can text questions to. We will receive those. And if you guys have questions, you can come to the microphones and just kind of line up at the microphone. Be nice. Be nice. If you're extremely bashful, I suppose you could text your question. Okay. I will say this, if you don't mind, put it up too. I will say this, be nice. okay? If we receive a question that is derogatory towards the United Methodist Church, we're not gonna voice that question, okay? So let's everybody play pretty, and if you have any questions, come on.
They will know we are Christians by our love, so we can ask, we can disagree without being disagreeable, right? What questions might you have?
Okay, the only question I have to begin with is, you said a lot of different things about the levels, the bishops, the elders, the deacons. I didn't see anything or hear anything about district superintendents.
Okay, so we don't call them district superintendents. We call them presiding elders. We kind of go back to the historic name that Methodists have used over the centuries. And so presiding elders will be handled differently by different provisional conferences. Some will choose most likely to have full-time presiding elders. Some will choose to have presiding elders that serve churches. And so you're going to see both models. So we're going to let the annual conference figure that out, because they know what's most effective in their area. And quite honestly, I could imagine it even being a mixture of that within an annual conference. You might have an annual conference that has 3 presiding elders and maybe 2 are also serving churches and 1's full-time. I could easily see that happening. I can tell you initially, as provisional conferences are forming, most are going with presiding elders that serve churches because it's less expensive. And they're trying to keep that footprint as small as possible. But as the church continues to grow and connectional funding hopefully grows some, even though it's still minimal, I think you'll see some switch to full-time presiding elders. It gets hard. I mean, having been a district superintendent, I can tell you, I know some who have served both a church and superintended, and someone generally feels cheated. The church feels cheated because they don't get their pastors full-time, or the churches in the district feel cheated because they don't get their DSs full-time. So it gets hard. It's doable, but you're going to see a mixture.
Very quickly, if you're online, the number that we put up the first time, it was not the right number.
Oh!
So
Are they ordering a pizza if they call that number?
Guy in the upstate who's like, what in the world is going on? But this is the right number now. Our apologies.
Someone's phone is blowing up with questions. What is the Global Methodist Church believe? And he or she is saying, what in the world? Yes.
Yes, sir. Pastor's retirement.
Okay.
We have West Path, and then we generally write a monthly check to the South Carolina Conference, which is substantially more at our church than the West Path payment. So can you elaborate a little bit about that, about how we're going to take care of the pastors as far as retirement and
Sure.
insurance?
Yep.
And that kind of thing.
Be happy to. So the health insurance will be the same because y'all are already using Health Flex with West Path. So that will be no different. Be exactly the same as what you have now. The retirement plan is different. It just so happens I chaired the team that helped create the retirement system, so I can speak about that fairly knowledgeably. What I'm about to say, some of you are going to go, there's no way. I promise you, this is true. Your church will pay less, but your pastor's benefit will be more. We designed that system very carefully. It is a defined contribution system, so there will never be any unfunded pension liabilities. We did that on purpose. So the way it works is your church will pay 5% of the salary plus housing of the pastor. And then the church will also pay a dollar-for-dollar match of up to an additional 5%. Of course, that's contingent on what the pastor decides to contribute herself or himself. So if they don't contribute anything extra, you'll just pay 5%. If they do the full match, you'll pay 10%. You're probably paying somewhere between 12 and 15% now. The pastor doesn't see all that because some of it goes into the defined benefit component of the clergy retirement security plan. Your pastor will see all of that under the covenant retirement plan. So if the pastor does the full match, that'll be 15% of their salary and housing coming in. You'll pay 10, they'll pay 5. So it's a bigger benefit than they're receiving now. It's less costly to the church than what you're paying now. Does that answer your question?
I think so. So if we write.
I'll repeat the question so we get it.
We certainly write the check to the South Carolina Conference. At that time, we'll write the check to the Global.
Retirement will be, you'll be billed from Westpath. So we have a benefits officer in the Global Methodist Church. His name's Rick Van Giesen, great guy. Rick will send you a bill, and then you'll pay it. And if your church wishes to have a retirement plan for your lay staff, you can do that. Westpath begged us, could we have a menu of 3 options? Because on the UMC right now, local churches that choose to provide retirement benefits, the church is the individual plan sponsor, they have over 2,000 plans. And you can imagine the extra costs that are involved with that when you have all these different plans that different churches have put in place. So we have 3 choices that you can choose for your lay staff. It dramatically reduces the administrative costs for that as well. You go here and then there.
Okay, from the text, could you clarify the structure of the local church? I thought trustees and SPRC are needed.
I thought, say the last part again.
I thought trustees and SPRC are needed.
I thought trustees or SPRC are needed. So if you want to have trustees and a staff parish relations committee and a finance committee and nominations, you can keep them. We're going to let you decide. And there are paragraphs in there for those committees if you want to keep that structure. But if you decide you want to go to a different structure, that's up to you. And we will allow you to do that. So, I mean, here's what some churches have done. If the person who's asking the question wants an example, what some churches choose to do is they'll have one leadership team. Let's say maybe 12 people. And they'll say, here's the leadership team of 12. These 3 will be a sub-team that kind of focuses on money. These 3 will focus on property issues. These 3 will focus on human resources and staffing issues. But, I mean, that's one way. There are other ways to do it. That's not the only way. But that's what some churches have chosen to do. But if you want to keep the old system, keep it. If that works for you, by all means, keep it. Yes?
Yeah, my question has to do with connectional funding.
Okay.
We all know that currently under the UMC, there are some churches who don't pay their apportionments, and they have sometimes very valid reasons for doing that. I understand that connectional funding will be drastically lower, but sometimes there are situations where a church feels they can't pay it. They just have things happen. If something like that were to happen, what's the process that the general church will go through to deal with the local church on how to reconcile that?
So it's a little hard to answer that question because
Okay.
it's hypothetical.
Right.
Here's a scenario that I could imagine. So the Book of Doctrines and Discipline is clear that churches are supposed to pay their connectional funding. That's just part of being connectional. I won't say every. There are seasons of life in a church where finances are not as good as others. So when Mike and I were together, we were in Cape Coral, Florida, which, other than Las Vegas, was the #1 location for home foreclosures in the Great Recession. 34% of all homes in Cape Coral, Florida were in foreclosure in 2008. So every third church on your block was in foreclosure. The church that we served together, there was a 2-year period where we just could not afford to pay all of our apportionments. So what did we do then? I could envision this happening in the Global Methodist Church too. I think this is the responsible thing to do. We wrote our bishop, said, hey, Bishop Whitaker, we're not able to pay all of our apportionments this year. Here's a 2-year plan to get back to 100%. So we're going to pay, I think it was 50%, and we're going to get to 75%, and then 2 years from now, we'll get back to 100. It's hard for me to imagine a provisional conference that would not work with a church that was willing to be transparent and proactive in that sort of thing. Now, if a church is not transparent and not proactive and just doesn't pay them and doesn't say why, I could imagine at some point a bishop's going to have a conversation with church leaders. And that paragraph where we could disaffiliate a church could be used. But there's no trust clause. The church wouldn't lose its property or anything like that. It would just be independent, at that
I
point.
would just add on to that. The reason I asked the question is I have some folks who are involved in North Georgia.
Yep.
There's been lots of stuff.
Yeah. Oh my. Yeah.
One of the things they said was that the GMC is going to put liens against people's property.
Ah, okay.
And
Thank you for
so
asking that.
I'm just going to be honest with
Yeah,
you.
thank you for asking that. So the question had to do is the GMC going to put a lien on your property? So let me talk about that a little bit. There was a provision in the original Book of Doctrines and Discipline that stated that there would be a lien placed on a church's property for the amount of unfunded pension liabilities. That is not true anymore. The reason that originally was there was because we had the protocol in place. And when we had the protocol allowed for all of the retirement accounts from withdrawing UMC clergy to actually transfer over to the Global Methodist Church. That is no longer the case because we don't have the protocol. So the Global Methodist Church under the protocol would have inherited millions, tens of millions of unfunded pension liabilities. And so the lien originally was talked about to help offset. So if a church left without paying its pension liabilities, the general church would not be on the hook and could still pay retirees their benefits. When the protocol collapsed, that was no longer an option, and that got deleted. It's gone. Great question. Yes?
I've got actually two or three.
Okay, go for it.
Sorry. Is health insurance required if your spouse, my spouse is
Okay.
about to retire as a state employee, and I will not need health
Okay.
insurance.
So let's
Will there still be a funding, like in South Carolina currently, my church has to still pay
Right.
the fee, which is around $11,000 or $12,000 a year?
So health insurance is mandatory for all clergy in the Global Methodist Church with 4 exceptions. If you get insurance through your spouse's employer, you do not have to purchase health insurance.
Okay.
If you are bivocational and you get insurance through your other employer, you do not have to be paid health insurance. If you receive a military health insurance, TRICARE, VA benefits, Champus, that sort of thing, you are exempt. You do not have to take health insurance.
Okay.
If you are old enough to receive Medicare, the church does not have to pay health insurance.
Okay. Do you have a plan for making sure we don't get out of balance? Because we know the administration at the Southeastern jurisdiction as well as jurisdictional and general conference has gotten extremely large and really almost, I think there was a consultation done in 2005 and we were told you need to reduce it, and our denomination did nothing about it. I think you're probably aware of that.
Oh, sure. So the safeguard on that, remember I talked about that, we know institutions tend to creep. So we have capped the connectional funding.
Okay.
So the general church is currently asking for 1%. It can never get more than 1.5%.
Right.
They may want to, but it says 1.5, and that's all you send in. By the way, and that's true of provisional annual conferences as well, capped at 5.
Right.
And no one's asking for more than 3. A lot are asking for less than that. Let me tell a little bit about how that works too, because some people get surprised about this, and I think this is good. Here's how connectional funding works in the Global Methodist Church. You tell us what your income was last year. We don't need to see any books. We're not going to audit you. We're not sending an IRS tax agent after you. You just tell us what it was. And you calculate what the 1% is. We trust you. And then you send it in. There's no year-end statistical report with 12,000 questions asked on it and all those sorts of things. We tell you how to we define operational income, and we trust you as an adult to figure that out, and you tell us. And we're going to trust that what you tell us is right because you're a follower of Jesus. Now, if we find out you're lying, I'm sure we're going to have a conversation.
Remember Ananias and Sapphira.
And there you go. Ananias and Sapphira would be a good example. But we're going to trust you and let you do. You calculate it, and you send it in.
Right. Third question. Part of our image issue right now is we know some of the things that have gone on in the Western jurisdiction that have seemingly gone unchecked. And there seems to be an understanding in some of our leadership that they think that doesn't impact us here in South Carolina, but because we're connectional, it impacts every single one of us.
I believe it does.
So how do we make sure that we have a discipline that's fulfilled so that we keep a good character and integrity?
I get asked that question a lot, so I have several answers to that. One is we've got to elect really good bishops. I hear people complain about I don't want bishops. And I'll actually respectfully say that's biblical. The Greek term for bishop is episkopos. Paul writes about the episkopos. It is biblical to have them. And I've talked to good Wesley scholars, dear friends of mine, who would tell you that John Wesley could never conceive of a legitimate denomination that did not have some sort of superintending in it. That's just part of an accountable Christian community. I don't think the answer is to not have bishops. I think it's to elect better bishops. I think it's about doing our due diligence in whom we elect, ensuring that we elect godly men and women. I want to elect people who've actually grown their churches. I'm tired of not having Episcopal leaders that have grown a church. That is crazy to me. We've just got to do a better job at it. That's one. Two, I love pastors. I am one. But I can't tell you how many pastors who have said to me, I just wanted to pastor my church. I didn't care about what was going on in the district or the conference. I just wanted to be in my church and be with my people and pastor folks and help make disciples. That's a lovely sentiment. That we lost the church over that. We have got to have... I know serving on a committee in a district or a conference is not everyone's favorite thing to do. I don't know anyone that wakes up in the morning and goes, ooh, I get to go to a finance committee meeting today. Yes! There's probably a couple of you who don't send me a letter. Most people don't. But we've got to have some of those. Even if you don't like it, we've got to have godly leaders who don't just focus on the local church and then we lose the rest of the connection. We have got to get better about that. And I pray we will learn that lesson from what has happened. And if we don't, we will pay a price eventually.
I have 4.
All right.
Your summary of positives for the GMC lists things like less bureaucracy, less apportionments, and greater autonomy, all of which would be even greater if we decided to become independent. It's also my understanding that the GMC would not seek to establish things like mission organizations, universities, or camp. So what benefit or enrichment would we receive by way of our potential affiliation and subsequent, I can't say that word.
Subsequent?
There you go. Apportionments to the GMC
Sure.
that we wouldn't receive in greater proportion by being independent.
So they're kind of two different questions. I guess they're related. I hope I give an answer that answers their question. So let's do the first one. Methodists are connectional. I do not personally believe, you can disagree with me without being disagreeable, I don't believe there is such a thing as an independent Methodist. That is an oxymoron. That's like a jumbo shrimp. There's just not. John Wesley could never, ever, ever conceive of Methodists not being connectional. So that for there to be an independent Methodist is not within his framework. Methodists are connected, so that's the benefit. The benefit is we are connected, we are held accountable, we have people who will appoint your pastor to you and help you find a pastor. You are connected to people who will, I pray, come alongside you and say, I love you, brother, I love you, sister, you shouldn't be doing this. This is not what a pastor does. It needs to stop. I get very worried about independent churches. It's not that they obviously exist, they do great ministry, but the number of independent churches, large independent churches that have had senior leaders have significant fallings over the past several years has been staggering, because there's no connectional accountability in place. Here's another thing. So I'm going to kind of get to the second piece. There is no missions agency for the Global Methodist Church. Why? Because if we reinvent that wheel, friends, who has to pay for it? You do. Here's the deal. There are lots of mission-sending agencies that are Wesleyan. There are plenty that aren't Wesleyan, that already exist, that have scale, that have distribution networks. Why do we need to reinvent that wheel? We do have official Global Methodist mission partners, TMS Global, what used to be called the Mission Society, One Mission Society, ILI, International Leadership Institute. There are others. They send missionaries out all over the world. They're all Wesleyan. They all have these amazing networks. Why do we want to rebuild something that they're already doing effectively when you can give directly to them and get people into places that need to know about Jesus? We just don't want to do that because we think it's more money that you don't need to spend duplicating efforts that people are already doing really, really well. We have our first ever missions conference coming up next week called Beyond These Walls. It's taking place in Houston, Texas, with dozens and dozens of mission partners who are coming to help Global Methodists understand how they can be in mission. So that's another way. Here's another thing that we do. I just think we can do more together than we can apart. So I can speak to my home state in Florida. We don't have a camp. We don't want one. Because if we have a camp, we've got to pay for maintenance on it. And who has to pay that? You do, through connectional funding. But we already have Global Methodist churches in Florida who have come together and said, we could rent this camp that already exists. You two churches team up on the curriculum. We'll work on the background checks. Y'all do the logistics. And our 8 churches will come together and have 300 kids come do summer camp this year. That's a beautiful, organic, connectional example of what can happen. So I just reject the idea of going independent. I love you if you do, it's okay, but I don't think you can be a Methodist and do that. I think that's an oxymoron.
Who would decide how to structure the church? The church, the pastor, a committee?
The church will. So I'm sure you would have a team of folks that would bring a proposal to the church, but the church would vote on it as a church family at a church conference.
How are bishops elected and deployed?
Ooh, great question. How are bishops elected? I don't know. We did not think that 3 unelected people should make that decision. So when we drafted the book, there were some things we left out intentionally. How to elect bishops was one of them. We just didn't think that was something we should prescribe. So the first general conference will decide how to elect them. There are a bunch of different proposals out there. I can tell you the Wesleyan Covenant Association's proposal, since I'm the president of it. I like our proposal. Our proposal is to elect double the number you need. If you need 10, elect 20. The 20 go into a pool, and then the annual conference gets to call the one that they want. Pastor Webb's mind just went because it puts the annual conference into the driver's seat. Now, that may not pass. I don't know. But that's our proposal. Someone else may have a better proposal. So I want whatever the best proposal is. There's some competing ideas on that.
When will the convening conference of the GMC happen?
It has been announced now. The convening general conference of the Global Methodist Church will occur late summer, early fall of next year. So August, September, October of next year, the convening general conference will occur. I don't think I'm talking out of school. The commission on the general conference has already been formed. I think I can say that. I guess I just did. So they are already working on securing the venue and all the details that come along with that.
Book of Discipline, is it currently a transitional book? Assume yes.
It is the transitional book of Doctrines and Discipline. The first general conference will meet. It's incomplete. So the election of bishops is one example. So they will need to insert provisions on the election of bishops. Once that first General Conference meets, the word transitional will fall away, not just from the Book of Discipline, from everything. Well, I'm ready to actually stop using the word transitional because it just is an extra couple syllables to add to everything. So once the first General Conference happens, that word will go away on everything. So it'll just be the Book of Doctrines and Discipline. Some people ask why doctrines and discipline and why doctrines plural instead of just doctrine and discipline. Because that's what the first Methodist Episcopal Church in America had. It had a book of doctrines, plural, and discipline. So we're going back to the old name.
So that answered their next question. The General Conference will make it official.
It will make it official.
Will
And by the way, at the first the Transitional Leadership Council is leading the church temporarily. When the first General Conference convenes, it goes out of business, and the General Conference takes over as the leading agency of the church.
Will GMC of South Carolina get a vote or no, since we are so far behind?
I assume they mean at the convening General Conference. So the question is, will South Carolina, if you don't have a provisional district or a provisional conference, you will be formed well before then. The answer is yes. And the TLC is actually wrestling right now to ensure how we get everyone represented, even in areas that don't have provisional conferences yet. So the answer is absolutely yes. Don't ask me how. They haven't decided yet. That is currently being worked on, but the answer is yes.
If a church has voted to separate and doesn't have a pastor going with them, do you have something available for them? Someone?
We do. As we were having that conversation before the meeting started. Do the math. We have 1,750 churches as of this week. We have about 2,300 pastors. So we have more pastors than we have churches. They may not all be in South Carolina. They're not in Florida, I can tell you that. But here's the really good thing. We have made it so easy for pastors to serve across annual conference lines. None of the old mess. It's a crazy kind of system if you want to be appointed to another annual conference in the UMC. I can tell you as a district superintendent, it's just hard. We did away with all that. So if you're a pastor in Tennessee and you get, the South Carolina folks say, hey, we'd really like Pastor Susie to come be our pastor. Pastor Susie says yes. The church says yes. Pastor Susie can come from Tennessee and it's no problem. So.
I'm concerned a little bit about the ministry of the laity.
Okay.
The Book of Doctrines and Discipline lumps lay speakers and lay servants and certified lay ministers
Yes.
under one whole category.
It does. That's right.
I'm one of 2, maybe 3 certified lay ministers in South Carolina that are currently serving church as a senior pastor. What will become of me?
Okay. I can answer that.
And I'm not on a course to become a deacon or an elder or even a local pastor.
So I can answer that. I'm going to get into the weeds, and I may bore some of you, so forgive me. The United Methodist Church has multiple categories of kind of advanced laity who have done some sort of study. There's lay speakers and lay servants and advanced lay servants and advanced lay speakers and home missioners and deaconesses and certified lay ministers. Remember, we are trying to make everything more simple. So we did intentionally make all of those categories one, certified lay minister. And there is a curriculum and all those sorts of things that's being worked on for that. What you have to understand, and this may be one of those areas, forgive me, where we have to disagree, but that be disagreeable. When the category of certified lay minister was created, it was never intended to be an appointable office. It later became one. The Book of Discipline, the United Methodist Church allowed CLMs to be appointed, but that was never the original intention. So here's what we have done in the Global Methodist Church. So if you are serving a church currently, you can continue to serve that church. You have 3 years to work towards becoming a deacon. And you no longer have to have an MDiv. You don't have to have a Master of Arts degree. You can do the course of study. It's 10 classes. And so you can do that. It's already developed. We have multiple schools offering it. Wesley Biblical, they offer it online, in person, and hybrid. United Theological Seminary. Asbury is coming along with it as well. So you can serve in that capacity for 3 years before you would need to.
I don't want to bore these folks with specifics of my situation, but I'm retired. I'm considered 1/4 time. There is no course offered by any seminary that would be affordable to someone like me on retirement and a minimum salary. How would you, 3 years from now I'm gone?
No, because you could serve as lay supply. So that would be one option. Here's another option. At least this is what Florida is doing inside Florida. We have said in Florida, and South Carolina will have to make this decision for itself, but we've said we want to create a culture where the church really becomes supportive of developing new clergy, so that if someone does take a course of study class, we want the culture to exist where the church supports that person and hopefully ensures that that cost of that class gets paid. I don't know if y'all will choose to do that here, but we have already started that in Florida. There is a ministerial education fund for the GMC. We're not even a year old yet, so we just don't have money in it yet. There will be, but for right now, at least on our case in Florida, we've said so if you're called in your local church to be a pastor, we actually think the local church should bear the cost of the evaluation, the test, the psych eval, and we think they should help with the course of study so that it is affordable, because we don't want people called by God to be pastors to not be able to get the education that they need.
Thank you.
So I hope South Carolina might think about doing something like that. The question was ballpark figure, what is the cost of one class? I don't know. I couldn't even I don't know. I have no clue. I couldn't. I just don't know. But you could go online to one of the seminaries and check. Do you know? What is it?
For Asbury, it's around $2,500 a class.
$2,500 a class.
A class, but that's in the.
Is that 3 credit hours?
That's not yes, I believe they're on the.
So it's about $700 a credit hour?
Yes.
So it's 10 hours. So at Asbury, it sounds like that's what Asbury, but they'll be different for everyone. So Wesley Biblical is offering the course of study virtually. I can't imagine it's that virtually.
Well, that's for the seminary.
Yeah, that's for a master of divinity degree. Yeah, so I don't know, I apologize, I don't know the answer to that, but you could go online and find out for sure. Sorry.
Will the GMC have any curriculum available for kids ministry, student ministry, small groups, Sunday school?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that, because I didn't mention this, and I love this. The Global Methodist Church has a catechism. We have never had a catechism before. We have a catechism now. If you want to read it, it's at globalmethodist.org. I pray that confirmation, youth ministries, adult discipleship, new members classes will use that catechism to make sure that people who come into our Global Methodist Church know what we believe and why we believe it. So that exists. If they're asking, will there be a publishing company? I doubt it. We don't want to pay for it, and y'all can do the math. You can check me on this. I may be wrong, but I don't think the United Methodist Publishing House is making a profit. I don't think they've made a profit in a long time. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but I don't think that's the case. So there are really good Wesleyan publishers that put Orthodox material out. Seedbed all day long. I encourage you to go to Seedbed. There are others as well, but there's plenty of material out there.
You mentioned both the first general conference and a convening general conference. Are they the same?
They are the same. The first general conference will be the convening general conference, yes.
Will the GMC have GMC men, GMC women groups on a denominational level, or just a local church level?
The question is, will there be I assume what they're asking is, will there be something akin to United Methodist men and United Methodist women? I think is what the question's asking. I don't believe so. I've not heard of that. remember, we're putting the local church back into the driver's seat. So I hope you have women's ministry. I hope you have men's ministry. But I think we're going to probably say, local church, you figure out what that looks like best in your environment. I know the United Methodist Women have rebranded themselves and are hoping to be used by other folks. I have my sincere doubts as to whether that will be compatible with the Global Methodist Church. They have positions that they stand for that would not be conducive to the Global Methodist Church's Book of Doctrines and Discipline.
How do we know things/wording won't be changed during first conference?
Well, it could be. The general conference gets to decide. So if a majority of the delegates vote to make a change, they could. I can't promise that. So no general conference is bound by the general conference that came before it. They can always make a change, so that's possible. But here's the good news. If they do and you don't like it, 90 days and a simple majority vote, you're out. No trust clause. You're done.
Why use the Book of Discipline if we are leaving UMC? Why not rewrite our own?
We did. Maybe the author didn't understand. Our 105-page document is really, really different from their 808-page document. They're not even close. So we did rewrite it.
Could an annual conference choose to add a lay minister office for people like Michael?
Could an annual... I'm not sure I understand the question. I know. I'm not sure if I understand the question, though. I don't think an annual conference... there's one certified lay minister office for laity, and there'll be classes, and they can be certified and recertified. There's a category of lay supply pastors. So I'd have to talk to that person some more. I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
What about hymnals? Anything expected?
I don't know. The General Conference may choose to create a commission to create a hymnal. I have no idea. I'm not worried about it. You can use the ones that you've got. I know you're supposed to take the cross and flame out. That does not apply to your hymnals. You can keep your hymnals. There are lots of other good choices. Remember I mentioned Seedbed a moment ago. They just came out with a new hymnal, Our Great Redeemer's Praise. I love it. I have a couple copies of it now. There's no hymnal police. So no one's, it's...
Do you know where the first general conference is being held?
No, that decision's not been made. The commission's working on that. I'm sure they're probably looking at multiple venues and getting bids. They want to be cost effective. So I'm sure they're shopping it to see what the least expensive option is. So no, it has not been announced yet. It was soon. I would imagine we'll know before the end of the year, I would think. It's hard to imagine that we wouldn't.
Does Global have to be part of our name?
Ooh, that's a good question. Does Global Methodist have to be a part of your name? No. Do you have to have the 3 circles and the cross? No. You're in the driver's seat. You rebrand for the way that is most effective for your church. If you want to put Global Methodist in the name, please do. If that is not helpful to you, please don't. If you want the 3 circles and the cross and that's helpful to you, lots of churches have done that. If that's not helpful in your community, or if you already have a brand that's established, use it. It's up to you.
Everybody out in the audience, you were texting me. I saw you.
Did you get any orders for pizza?
No, but I did get this. Please thank the speaker for his honest and graceful presentation.
Oh, that's kind. You're welcome.
You mentioned the general conference in the fall of '24. But as far as I know, we don't have a provisional South Carolina Global Methodist Conference. Who's going to represent us at the general conference?
So that's what I said. So they are working on a method to allocate delegates to areas that don't have provisional conferences by that time, so that everyone will be able to be represented at the general conference. Now, I will go out on a limb and risk not getting some of y'all mad at me. I can't imagine y'all won't be a conference by then, but I think you will. So I don't think it's going to be an issue at all. But even if you weren't, you would have a method to be able to have delegates.
Does the annual conference decide how to district its own churches? Or?
How to yes, the annual conference draws its own district lines. Correct. That's right. That's right.
What happens to ministry, what happens to individuals currently taking lay speaker classes that haven't completed them?
So you
And what additional classes will they have to take under Global?
So you'll transfer in as a certified lay minister. And then there is a new, so eventually you will need to recertify, and that curriculum's being worked on, but you'll come in as a certified lay minister. So if you're already a lay speaker or an advanced lay speaker or servant, you'll come in as a certified lay minister. And if you want to read the paragraph, it is 402, I believe.
But what happens if you haven't been now totally
If you haven't,
finished with all of the lay speaker?
I mean, if you're not
classes?
a certified lay speaker, well, if
Correct.
you're not one, then you won't be a certified. I mean, you'd have to be one to transfer in as one. So.
But the courses that
You're,
have
no,
already
you're
been
not going to
taken-
lose credit. No, no, no. Folks, we're going to be gracious. No. There's no one's going to go, oh, you didn't get that one class. You're at, we're going to be gracious. I know your South Carolina provisional district, eventually provisional, y'all going to be gracious. So I don't even have to think about that. I know that's going to be true.
Second question related to accountability and small group class meetings.
Oh, yeah.
How
okay.
often is it expected that we will have to conduct those type of meetings?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't been asked that too much. So if you know your Methodist history, originally, if you were a Methodist, you had to attend what was called a class meeting. And a class meeting is more or less what we would call a small group today, maybe a life group or something like that. Around the mid-1800s, the Book of Discipline was changed so that was no longer a requirement for membership. So a couple people have asked, will we go back to that idea in the Global Methodist Church? I think that's something the first and maybe second General Conference are going to have to wrestle with. So I don't know that answer is knowable yet. It certainly is in line with who we are as Wesleyans. So I could see it happening, but I don't know that anyone knows just yet. I would personally, which matters none, but I'd personally not be opposed to it. But
Thank you.
yeah. More texted questions. Woo! All right.
What's the GMC's plan for Wesley Foundations and campus ministry?
Ooh, that's a good question. So Wesley Foundation's campus ministries will really kind of be different from conference to conference. So there's some provisional conferences whose Wesley Foundations are choosing to move into the Global Methodist Church with them. And if that's the case, it will obviously continue to function. If not, here's what I would imagine taking place. What I imagine taking place is the provisional conference will say, how do we want to do ministry to college students? And there's just lots of ways to do that. I mean, having something like a Wesley Foundation is an option. It's an expensive option. Maybe you get 2 or 3 churches close to the college who all agree to put in X amount of dollars to say, we're going to be in ministry to the students at Clemson, or USC, or Wofford, or PC, or Charleston Southern, or you name the school, Claflin. I could see that being a way to do it as well. So I think you'll see some creativity there, and I think it will depend from conference to conference.
Can you talk about full-time local pastor and church transfer together?
Okay. So In the United Methodist Church, remember we talked about there are lots of layers of types of clergy. Local pastors are one of them. Local pastors are the unsung heroes of the United Methodist Church. We have more of them than elders and deacons. If we did not have them, the denomination would come to a screeching halt. They don't get the same pay. They don't get the same voting rights. They don't get the same benefits or privileges. They are mistreated as second-class clergy. It is wrong. We don't have any of that. No second-class clergy in the Global Methodist Church. So local pastors will come into the Global Methodist Church depending upon how much of their course of study they have finished. If they have completed their course of study, they should come in as an elder. If they still have some classes to go, they probably will come in as a deacon. It is possible that they've done so few classes that they might come in temporarily as a local pastor until they finish enough to become a deacon. But local pastors are going to be deacons and elders. So no more of that.
I just wanted to say that if you are here and you would like to speak to some of the local GMC people, there's a couple of people, clergy and lay people that have already involved in the GMC of South Carolina, and they'll be up on the stage if you want to come speak to anybody. And I'd also like to say again, and if we could put it on the screen, whoever the Malden people are, the website is gmcofsc.org.
Yep.
If we could get that up there. And I'd also like to tell everybody to please go to the Facebook page, which is also gmcofsc.org. So the South Carolina people are trying to get started, and there's just some people working on it, but because nothing's really happened officially until July 1st with our December 19th discernment plan, some of the clergy have not really come out real publicly yet, but it's starting at a trickle.
It's time, friends. So, and if you're not aware of this, just know you can, as your closure process is working, you can parallel to that be working on your affiliation process. So your church can go ahead, if you know you're going before the annual conference this June, and if you wish, you can have a church family meeting, vote to join the Global Methodist Church. There's a digital application. You can do that now and just make it pending your closure date in South Carolina so that there's a seamless sort of transition. Pastors could begin to do that as well. One benefit of doing that, I know some churches want to have a kind of a fallow period. I get it. If that's your church, that you decide. But one of the benefits of not doing that and kind of going right in is your pastors and or lay staff have no break in their retirement coverage. So it goes right in, and your pastor would stop receiving retirement benefits under the UMC umbrella on June 30th. At midnight, they would start accruing them on the GMC side of the West Path, the very next moment. So that's not, is that the only reason why you should do it? Absolutely not. But it is a benefit to go ahead and doing that.
I'd like to know if we're going to be definitely policies and procedures, first of all, to hold bishops accountable for their actions, and also will there be policies and procedures to remove bishops who do not obey the discipline?
Answer is yes to both, and encourage you to go to part 8 or 9, I don't have it in front of me, of the Book of Doctrines and Discipline. So yes, there is a whole structure in place for that, and as I said to you earlier, one of the new pieces for bishops is there is a completely independent commission that will hold them accountable. No bishop is allowed to serve on it. Only laity and clergy. So no more bishops holding bishops accountable. It's laity and clergy holding bishops accountable.
I think that
Last
you have
one.
been amazing, and we are grateful. I'd like to stop there.
Yeah, let's do it.
Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate everybody coming. In 1966, I was baptized in the Methodist Episcopal Church. I've been a United Methodist my entire life. With the exception of those first 3 years, and I wasn't really doing much those years. I find this whole process heartbreaking and gut-wrenching at the same time. ask that you continue to not just pray for where we're going, but pray for the United Methodist Church as well.
Absolutely.
For our brothers and sisters there who also love Jesus just like we do, but have a different way of thinking about the scriptures than we do. And you're going to be hanging around.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. You got individual questions?
And the other Global Methodists are where?
On the stage, I think, afterwards. Yeah, they'll be up
Okay,
here
up on the stage.
And the website, right there, gmcofsc.org.
I wasn't paying attention, I'm sorry. If you'd stand, please. May God go with you. His love, His grace, and His peace. From the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. May He be with you right now, tomorrow, and forever. Amen.